As soon as it starts. Okay, Commissioner Udaley, you're the incumbent here. Could you please introduce yourself? Tell us which position you're running for and just give us a very brief bio, please. Thank you.
Sure. My name's Chloe Daly. I'm running for re-election to position number 4. I was a small business owner, bookseller for 22 years before joining council. I was inspired to run by our housing crisis. And although I have never had the Housing Bureau in my portfolio, I've made that a major focus of my first 3 years in office.
Could you just give us a little more biographical detail for those people who don't know you? Where'd you grow up?
Born in Portland, raised in the metro area, in some more rural areas. I mean, 22 years is a long time. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Mingus, if you'd like to jump in and give us a little bit of your biography, please.
Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yep,
okay,
go ahead,
great.
Please.
Thanks, everybody. I'm still, I have a little bit of, we'll just go with it. First of all, I want to thank everyone for coming out this afternoon. Thanks to the Willamette Week for organizing this to get together. I know this is a remarkable moment during a time of an epidemic. This is what democracy looks like, and I'm really glad to be here. My name is Mingus Maps. I'm a candidate for City Council position number 4. I'm a longtime Portlander. I'm a dad. I'm a political scientist, and I'm a public servant. I'm in this race because I love Portland. We live in a beautiful community. Portlanders are fundamentally kind, creative, and connected. At the same time, our city faces some important challenges, and I'd like to see us make some progress on those. A great example is this pandemic that we're in the middle of. Even when we survive this immediate health crisis, we're going to have an important economic crisis to steward. Surviving that economic crisis will require coordination from the federal level to the state level to the local level. I look forward to providing leadership to help us navigate these difficult shoals. And after we survive this crisis, we need to dig into the basic business of running Portland. I care deeply about reducing homelessness, bringing more affordable housing to the city. And I think we need fundamental change and restructuring of City Hall. So, for example, I want to change the way we elect members of City Council. Everyone right now runs at large. I think it's time that members of City Council run through neighborhood-based electoral districts. I also want to hire a city manager to coordinate services across different city bureaus so that our services are no longer siloed. And most of all, I want to change the culture in our city. I think I've been deeply disappointed by the tone and texture of our politics. Our city is far too divided, especially to succeed at moments like this. When I'm on city council, one of the things I'll do is I'll be evidence-based and constructive, and I'll invite everyone to the table to help us hash out how we make the best public policy in the best city that we possibly can.
Okay, Sam Adams, please jump in.
You need to unmute yourself.
Sam.
Thank you. Hi, Sam Adams. Thanks for hosting this debate. I grew up in Newport, Oregon, and my dad was a special ed teacher in high school to make ends meet. He was a commercial fisherman during the summer. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, high school dropout, who eventually started going to night classes at the closest community college that offered them, which was Lynn Benton in the Valley. My folks, at a certain point when we lost the commercial fishing business because of overfishing, family blew up with a lot of issues around substance abuse. And both my families divorced, went to Eugene, where my mom, we lived in subsidized family student housing, and my mom was able to complete her high school and college degree. I went to South Eugene, went to school both at the University of Oregon, an exchange at the University of Guadalajara in Mexico, and PSU. Took 15 years to graduate from high school. going back to classes at PSU. Growing up with kind of family I had, I understood early on the benefits that government can provide hardworking families in troubled times. And so I chose a career of public service, starting with Peter DeFazio as an intern when he was the Lane County Board of Commissioners, then went on to serve in his congressional campaign, then in his district office, eventually moving to the State House of Representatives, where I met Vera Katz. She asked me to be her campaign manager, and then I served as chief of staff to 11 years as her chief of staff when she was at City Hall. I decided to run for office because I thought I had something to offer for commissioner. Wasn't expected to win because at that time Vera was very unpopular, but she did. I devoted my efforts to small businesses, education. I was assigned the Transportation and Environmental Services Commission Bureau. Did the Watershed Reclamation Act, the first one for the city. Transportation focused on safety. When Tom Potter decided not to run for city council, put my hat into the ring and won. I had an aggressive agenda that was put together before Lehman Brothers Wall Street collapse, but I stuck to that agenda afterwards, and also managing the city through the Great Recession. We did that with, I overcut the city's budget, so we had resources to put out to vulnerable people. Even though cutting the city's budget, $43 million in general fund proceeds, expended allocations for things like keeping people in their home that were about to lose it, expanding shelter beds. It was about a 30% increase in funding for housing. I also fast-tracked jobs. We looked at 4 years worth of construction projects that had already been funded and were in the pipeline, and we moved them up so that we could keep more people in the construction business working. And then we completely refashioned PDC to be not an economic development agency anymore, but really an agency focused on job creation, and put together the city's first export strategy, first neighborhood small business strategy. The neighborhood improvement network is something that I did with the county. So I'm bringing that hands-on experience to this race. I thought that the city was lagging behind in terms of addressing the challenges that we faced before the pandemic. Even now, I think that having experience on City Hall, and in this case, I also bring the work out of Washington, D.C., being able to travel the world and see what cities do all over the world on the issues that we face here. So that's the value proposition I bring, is a lot of new ideas from traveling all over the world and experience getting Portland through tough times, taking on tough issues.
Great. Seth?
Yeah, so I was born just outside Seattle, on the east side of Seattle, in a mobile home on a half-acre lot in the woods. And I went to Willamette University. So I spent my entire life essentially in the mobile home before I was 18. And I went to Willamette University, studied computer science, and went into computer consulting and working for Silicon Valley firms mostly. And so my background is as a computer scientist in scientific computing systems, graph algorithms, navigation, logistic systems. And I currently work on an innovative Doppler radar startup company for real-time sensing of everything from forest fires to air pollution to particulates, as well as rain. And I spent some time re-architecting and architecting systems that operate at a multinational scale with millions of users, responsive to streams of real-time data updates when I built the navigation system that is used at Uber. And I'm running for Portland Commissioner number 4 to ensure that the city has a good voice for good government, better democracy, improved accountability systems, less influence from major donors and big businesses against the public interest, to ensure that health is a priority, especially in relation to government regulations. And to those ends, I founded Portland Clean Air, a pollution data analysis, education, and watchdog organization. I work to hold government officials accountable by implementing campaign finance reform and disclosures, tracking election law and campaign finance violations of those and related reforms, and by filing official complaints for those violations of the public trust. Plus, I was on 2 state task forces regarding campaign finance reform and fair legislative redistricting.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Seth. Commissioner, you're the incumbent. Let's come back to you to start. You've done a lot of things for tenants since you were elected. You've implemented new policies that protect them in a variety of ways. I guess the question that I would like to ask you is, what have you done to increase the supply of housing and to make sure that new housing that is built efficiently and not gold-plated?
Sure. First of all, Mark, when you said to briefly give our bio, I took you literally, so I certainly could share quite a bit more about my history and my work on City Council, but I'll just hope that I have an opportunity to share more of that throughout this interview. So as I mentioned, I've never had the Housing Bureau, but I've worked diligently on housing issues. My major focus has been tenant protections. I'm the first renter to be elected to City Council in anyone's memory, and I have devoted a lot of my discretionary time and that of my staff to developing tenant protections, which is an essential part of solving our housing crisis. And the lack of adequate tenant protections in Portland and in Oregon over the last few decades is no small part of our overall crisis. So my focus has not, well, I've certainly supported the housing bond, I supported the Metro housing bond, I have supported various policies that have come through council. No one person can do everything. I'd say as far as generating more housing, I've been very engaged with the residential infill project conversation. While I support rolling back decades worth of racist zoning codes that have excluded communities of color and low-income residents from vast swaths of our city, I'm very concerned that that policy isn't going to generate the number of units we need and the type of units we need. So I've done a lot of work in that arena. One of the major things I've been working on is solving a kind of failure in the market or gap in the market, which is funding for or financing for homeowners to build ADUs. As it stands, the average homeowner in Portland is not going to be able to benefit from RIP unless they decide to sell their property, because the average homeowner in Portland simply doesn't have access to the capital to build ADUs. We're working on a loan product that would take into account rental income, similar to how commercial loans work, that would deliver those resources further down the economic ladder and open up the opportunity for thousands of Portland homeowners to help contribute to our housing inventory and our housing crisis. And at the same time, I've also been exploring incentives for affordability on those units as well as accessibility, because we know that we are very short on accessible housing for our existing population. And as our community ages, we are going to have a higher and higher demand for accessible housing. I'm
Thanks.
also
So I guess what I'm wondering, can I
Sure.
just follow up on that for a second? Yeah. So you mentioned the concerns that you have about the residential infill project and your desire to finance ADUs. That's great. I guess the question I wonder is whether there's a sense of urgency around creating new supply, whether it's the ADU product, whether it's the number of units the city has produced with its housing bond money, or whether it's passing residential infill in some form, whether it's perfect or not. I mean, we've been talking about that policy for the whole time you've been on council, and it's not your responsibility entirely, but there feels like we're letting the perfect be the enemy of the good to me in some ways.
Sure. I mean, I certainly bring a sense of urgency as a formerly cost-burdened renter who struggled to keep a roof over my family's head. and the lights on. And you'll see that reflected in the fact that I passed the strongest tenant protection the city has seen in decades in the first 30 days that I was in office. I'd say I've been the most enthusiastic about revisiting RIF. It's fascinating work to me. I think some of my colleagues have been more reticent to open that conversation back up. But Mark, I would push back on that a little bit. We don't have a housing supply shortage. We have thousands and thousands, possibly over 15,000 empty units. What we have is a shortage of affordable housing and a gross mismatch between the existing demand and need in our community and what the market is willing to build. So while, yes, there is urgency, we are on track with the housing bond dollars to create those 1,300 or so permanently affordable units. We're on track to meet Commissioner Fish's goal of 2,000 permanently affordable units with support services. I guess I just have a fundamental disagreement that the only solution is more housing. That hasn't actually proven to solve housing crises around our country in recent memory. We need stronger protections. We need more home ownership opportunities for low and middle income residents. We need a deep investment in affordable housing from our federal government. And we need solutions, big solutions, like how about we end the biggest housing subsidy in the country, which is the mortgage interest deduction, which primarily benefits middle and upper middle class Americans, and invest some of those billions of dollars into affordable housing.
Yeah, great. Okay, thanks.
Chloe,
Let's move.
can
Go
I
ahead.
interrupt, Nigel?
Sure, go ahead.
Well, Chloe, this is the second time we've gotten together and you've talked about your desire to have basically the city become a bank and
I'm sorry,
create
Mark,
affordable loans.
you said that this wasn't a debate, so I'm not sure why Mingus is directly addressing me. And also, that's absolutely not what I've suggested. So the premise
Chloe,
of your
this is Mark
question is
Sussman
false.
talking. Chloe, this is Mark Sussman talking.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Okay. All right. I'm interpreting what you're saying as having the city get into the housing finance business in a much more expanded way than it has in the past.
No. No, we've been seeking seed money to prove the concept. There isn't an existing product on the market because ADU development, by and large, has not been allowed in single family neighborhoods across the country. So there's no good product on the market. We've been working with private industry and community advocates to try to develop one. I've been seeking seed money for that to prove the concept. Given the current circumstances, I don't think that I will be able to fund that at all. And in fact, it wasn't even part of the budget conversation this year.
Okay, fine. Thank you for clarifying.
It was never my intent to have the city act as a bank.
Thank you for
And
clarifying.
I apologize. The sound is a little muddy and I heard different voices coming in.
Go ahead, Nigel. Sorry to interrupt. Nigel, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Seth, would you like to follow up on that? Commissioner Udaly is not the housing commissioner, but she spent a lot of time on housing. If you'd like to offer some thoughts on that, that'd be great.
Well, so I do think we definitely need to build more housing. I think pretty much every economist agrees that you need to build housing to get out of housing crises, and I agree with Joe Courtwright and other economists on that matter. And what I would try to do is, in addition to making it so that there are fewer restrictions and it's easier, it's cheaper to actually build housing, I think we need to revisit our entire tax system, which, that you would be able to do that at the state level much more easily. But we should be pushing the state to allow us to do like land value taxes and things like that. One thing I would like to do is consider doing if not a state bank, that's another state level issue, but a municipal bank, and then put our money into that. And then we can actually get funds to invest in these types of housing ideas. One thing I would do, rather than try to give people loans, is I would have the city try to buy land and own the land, and then allow private developers or potential future homeowners to build on it, build the equity in the housing, and that way they don't have to pay for the cost of the land. That saves $300,000. There are a whole bunch of ideas you could do, but I definitely disagree with the idea that building housing isn't the solution. You definitely need to do that.
I didn't say that we didn't need to build housing. I said that there are multiple issues, and a market-based solution to this housing crisis is not going to be sufficient.
Sam Adams, would you like to weigh in on this, the Commissioner's housing policies to date?
Sure. Before I sort of get to some of the bigger issues, there are three urgent things at stake here that really put at risk the investments in affordable housing, public investments in affordable housing to date. And I know that because of having gone through the Great Recession. There are affordable housing projects by nonprofits that do not have the deep pockets, do not have the deep bank accounts to necessarily financially withstand if renters are not able to pay their rent. And what I saw in 2008 is we interceded and provided loans and grants to those affordable housing projects where we saw, when we looked at the books, were really at risk of being taken over by the bank. We need to bring that group together, the mayor, whoever, bring that group together and start problem solving right away. There are some private only affordable housing projects only, but there are a lot of public and private affordable housing projects, and we desperately need to keep them solvent. So that's issue number one. And we need to make money available to them with loans or grants to cover the shortfall. Issue number two, in the debate at City Council, we were asked the yes/no question: do I support a rent freeze? Yes or no? And I said it depends on the detail. I support a rent freeze, but this is an important missing detail. People on the City Council, the Housing Affordability Advocacy Committee, we've all been working to get people in low wages into a home ownership position. And again, going back to my time in 2008, I don't want to see that all evaporate. I want a package that, yes, absolutely freezes rents, but I also want it combined with a package that provides relief for people at low income that are trying to stay in the house, which they are trying to still buy. That's the kind of package that we need in terms of helping Portlanders and Oregonians. Two other issues. I fundamentally disagree with this notion that building more housing isn't part of the affordable housing solution, especially if you're building affordable housing. And, going on PSU's study of the needs of housing in the region, and also related housing services, and there's also Eco Northwest that's done a number. It's pretty clear that in the next 10 years, depending on how you look at it, to make up for just a portion of our housing gap, and especially the affordable housing gap, that's about 30,000 units. And the city already has shown itself to be incredibly slow in spending money they already have, and I'll get to that in a minute. So we need someone on council who can bring the community together through a process, the most ardent rent control advocate, whoever the woman is in downtown New York that gets to decide where $1 billion in investment goes for housing, some of it to affordable housing, and take ourselves through the process to figure out what it's going to take to build those 30,000 units and attract probably between 14 and 16 billion dollars in private capital to get that done. Public capital going to very precious resource. Talk about that in a second. And we have to not just build a housing strategy for the city. Roll your eyes, I know. I tried to get interest in council in doing this in 2006, and the answer I got was, well, that would be very controversial if you look at anything other than affordable housing. But it all sort of goes together. I would, through that process, figure out how to build the 30,000 units of housing through the strategy, but also some ready-to-build concepts that we can provide investors the kind of confidence they're going to need that they can get their project built, designed to fit the local community, but get that project built. And I do agree with Seth, there's untapped land around the city. I don't know how much we can buy, but we can certainly make deals. I talk about the big Fred Meyer stores. Think of Gateway, where probably the last 3 rows of parking in those big Gateway complex behind the Fred Meyer are, grassy parking spots because they're not being used because people are shopping online. And I think we can go to the investors that sometimes own the stores and the improvements and the building, but often not, and begin to sell them on some ideas to actually make money off that property that they're not making now. Again, through this, yes, use city property, but also make some money. I fought with Minnesota Retirement Pension Fund.
Sam, let's have you stop. Let's have you stop there, and let's give Mingus Maps a chance to weigh in on housing policy.
Fair enough.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity to respond to this question. I disagree with the incumbent's analysis that building more housing is not part of the solution to our housing crisis. I also disagree with the incumbent's proposal to eliminate the mortgage interest tax deduction. I think that part of the solution to our affordability problem is building more. I think we can do that by getting City Hall out of the way of bringing more affordable housing to the city. How do we do that? I have 2 strategies. Our permits office and our inspections processes are famously slow and cumbersome. When I'm on city council, one of the things I'll do is work to make the permitting process quicker and less expensive, especially for affordable housing. And I'll do what I can to make the inspection process go more efficiently and faster. That way, people who build can bring their projects in quicker and with less expense.
Nigel, if I could just say something briefly. I've listened to all 3 of my opponents misrepresent what I said about housing production, and I would really strongly encourage them to focus on facts and my actual work and policy positions instead of misrepresenting me. As someone who supports RIP, clearly I am not against housing production. As someone who has supported Habitat for Humanity and Proud Ground and has pushed on land banking and housing trust, land trust models, I am not against housing production. It's simply false, and it's kind of sad that they can't come at me on actual work I've done. I'd encourage you, Mingus, to talk to people at BDS or developers about the significant improvements I made in the 18 months that I had that bureau. Thanks to my work, developers can now apply for permits online and submit their plans online. We did streamline the permitting process. We have streamlined the inspections process. And I brought back the small business liaison to help small-time developers and community organizations. So I've actually done significant work in this area. I am not against housing production. What I am saying is that we have a lot of existing housing. We have a gross mismatch between what our demand is and what is being supplied by the private market. And dumping more market rate units into our housing inventory isn't working. And it's not going to work.
Okay.
Thank you for that, Commissioner, for the clarification. If I could just jump right in, I appreciate the suggestion that I talk to developers about the permits office. I have, and the thing that I hear over and over again is that the policies that have been adopted by City Hall over the last several years have really choked off our ability to efficiently bring more affordable housing to the city. And I think
that's not relevant to the work I've done.
Bringing more affordable housing to the city. This is on tape. I think if our listeners go back to and listen to your analysis of our housing problem, it's there. So people can just rewind to see what you said.
Okay, great. Let's move on.
They can also rewind to see what I've done.
And they should do that. I encourage people to do that.
Let's move on. Okay, sorry. Mayor Adams, you did serve as mayor of this city, and I'm not going to relitigate the whole Beau Breedlove scandal, but I'm going to ask you a basic question, which is, given that you previously breached the public's trust as an elected official, why should voters trust you again?
Sam, you're on mute.
Thanks for the question. Admitted to my mistake. It was a dumb mistake. It was thoroughly investigated. No legal wrongdoing was found. And I told folks at the time, when I considered the options, that I would work twice as hard, 3 times as hard to make sure that my stupidity didn't impact the agenda that I ran on and won on. I didn't, when I put together my aggressive agenda, contemplate the Great Recession, but nonetheless proceeded. When I came into office, I won with 52% of the vote. I came into the office, the public viewed the right direction of the city at about 60%. When I was leaving office, I had a favorable approval rating of 54%. And about 60% of Portlanders thought the city was going in the right direction. I accomplished what I did, and some of my toughest critics, even admit I was an accomplished mayor. And that was the oath that I took to I took publicly to the community when my stupidity admitted to my stupidity, and I kept at it to try to deliver.
I'm sorry, the sound quality is not very good. So let me see if I can follow up on that. So are you the same person that we elected mayor previously? You're not running for mayor now, but are you the same person, or have you changed?
Yeah, no, I've changed. You don't go through something like I didn't go through something like that and not really do some soul searching on what caused me to do a very stupid thing, to lie about an accusation brought up by a would-be political opponent. And so I've done that kind of introspection. It has made me a humbler person. It has, it definitely made me a better partner, a better public servant. I always liked meeting with people and listening to people, but the fallout of that required me to be a better sort of professional partner, a better colleague, a more interested supporter of other people's work. I also, learned that I needed to do a better job of having balance in my life and taking care of myself better. So yeah, it changed me. It was painful for the city. It was painful for me. It was painful for my colleagues. I did my best to make amends by getting the tough stuff done. And I think we delivered on much of what I originally proposed to do before there was a recession. Portlanders are fair-minded people, and I really am grateful for that, and I appreciate that.
Can I get in here with a question for all four of you? You know, it seems to me, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
It seems to me that the paradigm has shifted quite a bit from the moment that you all decided to run for this office, or in the case of Chloe, decided to run for the election. And I'm sure you're reading the same economists that I'm now reading that say that housing is probably not going to be in as much demand. No one's going to be moving. And the fact of the matter is there aren't going to be jobs here for people to move to. And so I worry that your general's fighting the last war. And I'm wondering if you could speak to the fact that the situation is significantly different today than it was in January. The unemployment rate in Portland will be 20% by the end of the year. Your interest and willingness to get revenue from businesses big and small to do what you want to do isn't going to be there. And so let me focus this on a specific question. The city is going to have to do with less. So can you talk about what the city can do without? What departments, what programs? How are you going to tighten the ship in the same way that every small business in this city has already done so, if not shut down? That's for any of you.
Who do you want to go first?
Go ahead, Seth.
Yeah, well, some of us here, like Chloe and I, have been in small businesses and even big businesses, in my case. And so we're used to going through, I've been through multiple rounds of layoffs, one of them with myself. And so I know, you know, that stuff has to happen. Even the nonprofit work I do, we have some seasonal employment, so people have to get hired and let go. And you try really hard to try and keep everything going, but you have to be able to make the decisions to actually cut things that need to be cut. And
Seth, Seth,
yeah.
Seth, I got to interrupt you here, both for you and for everyone else. I hear all that. This is a question that is intended to gauge your understanding of the city budget and whether or not you have looked at it carefully enough to be able to make some value judgments about what's more important than not and what could go. So,
right.
And I would ask you all
just about to get there.
Respond to this to be as concise and focused as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think a significant, I think we really need to look at some of the labor agreements and sit down with the unions, and because that's a huge part of the budget. And I think we need to see. I think a lot of the rest of the city is struggling, and so I think people we're going to have to be able to talk about not just the consistent pay increases, but temporary pay cuts. That would help. That itself would reduce the amount of money in the economy. I don't like to have to do that, but you have to be able to do that independently. And I haven't been endorsed by any of the unions, and so I don't really have to worry about that being a big problem for me. And as far as services, I want to make sure as many services can continue, and anything that's, and I think the biggest cost there is labor. Again, I'm just going to say it.
I'm happy to go next. Oh, never mind.
Good. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Chloe.
So, yeah, we're in a little bit of a holding pattern as we determine what the impact is going to look like. And as of this week, it's sounding like it's going to be slightly worse than our initial worst case scenario. Our focus in the very short term is minimizing impact to essential services and minimizing impact to workers. That being said, it's very clear that we're going to have to make dramatic cuts, especially in one of my bureaus, which is PBOT, which doesn't heavily rely on general fund, but other sources of revenue that are down anywhere from 50 to 100%. And we're having really tough conversations about that. We are considering foregoing COLA, foregoing merit pay, foregoing steps. That saves several $1 million. We are going to start offering workers who want to voluntarily reduce their hours. Maybe they have responsibilities at home that they need to tend to save money there. The next step would be furloughs. I'm very concerned about our workers being able to maintain their health insurance, even if they're furloughed. And the last resort is layoffs. As we have these conversations, we're bringing a very strong equity approach to this situation, because as you probably know, a lot of our equity hires are in unrepresented groups, or are newer hires, or are in starter positions. And if we just cut those wholesale, we're going to lose a lot of ground on equity. So that's another conversation that we're having. We're also looking at ways that we can eliminate inefficiencies and redundancies that happen when you have 24+ bureaus overseen by usually 5, but currently 4 individuals. People talk a lot about siloing. It is true that it happens. It's also true that there's been a lot of collaboration over the past 3 years, and now we're going to have to get even more creative and resourceful about that collaboration. So I could go into more specifics if you want. I'm in a little bit of an awkward position where I don't want to share things that we haven't already shared with our workers.
No, that answers the question.
Okay, thank you.
Mingus?
And
You're up.
am I on? There we go. Thanks for the opportunity to answer this question. I think you're right. I think everyone's priorities have shifted as a result of this pandemic and impending recession. We need to begin planning and preparing now, and there will be cuts. I don't think there's anyone out there who can deny that. This is something that political leaders need to begin to say now. We will need to do, frankly, more with less, and we'll have to think about what our priorities are now. My personal priorities are that the city needs to, stay true to its core mission. We need to protect public safety and human dignity. As we also need to make sure that Portlanders have access to the resources they need to survive over the next several months while this plays out. One of my proposals, frankly, is that we radically increase the amount of funding that we provide for emergency rental assistance. I don't want any Portlander to lose their home because of the crisis that we're in. I also think that we need to reimagine how we do government. I think it's, frankly, Prosper Portland is an organization that I think has been looking for a mission for a long, long time. This is a great opportunity to reimagine what Prosper Portland does. I think that they are in a good position to help us to transform into essentially to lead our recovery efforts, our economic recovery efforts in Portland, and I look forward to working with them on that project. I also think that one of the jobs of members of City Council right now will be to identify the unmet needs of Portlanders and then lobby the state government and the federal government for aid to help us meet those needs. And then we need to husband resources now. We need to begin planning today. So it's time for a hiring freeze. If I were on City Council right now, one of the things I would be asking all my bureau directors to do is to put together budget proposals which include dramatic cuts. Probably on the order of 15 to 20%, I would imagine. I haven't seen an official estimate yet, but we need to begin planning for our future, and it's going to be a leaner future. On the other hand, if we're intelligent, we can actually come out with a better government that delivers services effectively. And my goal is that we get through this without anyone losing their housing, without any businesses going bankrupt, and with Oregon being stronger and more dynamic than we were the day before all of this started.
Okay, thank you, Mingus. Sam?
Well, Mark, I appreciate this is a how question, how to go about it, not just a what question, because that is how we're going to do this is really important. First off, 4 weeks ago, I transformed my campaign to really have my supporters and myself and my team, a big part of my efforts focused on, getting the governor to do a stay-at-home order, trying to get the state to do better with it, which it still hasn't with the unemployment insurance process that it has. Fighting for frontline workers to be recognized as an essential worker. So I agree with that. What Mingus said so much. I'm doing that as part of my campaign right now, in addition to campaigning. In terms of the budget, I've been through 19 city budgets in various forms. The freezes, the stop hires, all of that. Yes, that will get you some savings. Looking at general fund capital appropriations to potentially buy you some cushions, very important. There are sometimes strings attached to that, so it not be as a significant amount of money as it might look like. But what I did in increasing funding in one of the worst years in 2009, increasing funding for services to vulnerable communities and $42 million over 4 years while cutting the hell out of the city's budget is, you have to have the mindset, because it's like any organization, it's really hard to get sort of in the bubble, it's in these times, in these most urgent times, when city government needs to be doing as much as it possibly can, which means more than it used to do, to help people that are going through these tough times. And so there is a lot of value to middle management at the city. It's just not as valuable as most frontline services. And so in 2009, 56% of my cuts were to mid-level managers, administrative services. Again, they have value, but not when there's something out there that has more value. Sometimes then I would take a look at programs that were recently added. And then I would also take as I did in the past, look at the oldest programs, sort of the bookends, to see if that, and to not come at that with any sort of bias, because the oldest program might be very germane, but it might not be. And the newest program might be more important than the previous program. But in everything I did, and I got kudos for balancing, the budgets from my commissioners, because I was at the budget knee of Vera Katz, who, as you know, was the Ways and Means, and I had good tutelage of that. I bring that, and like I talked about earlier with the preserving our investments, hundreds of millions of dollars investment in affordable housing. Yes, we have to take care of the city family, but that is only part of the job. Our need for city government to be focused externally in the midst of that pain is now more than ever. And that focus means more cash going out in the community.
Thanks for that. If I can just pursue this, because Sam, you have been, both in that comment and one you made earlier, not that subtly suggesting that you can speak to the business community in a way that the incumbent cannot. Am I misreading that? And then I want to give Commissioner Udaly a chance to respond.
No, I didn't. I wasn't thinking that at all. I was making those statements. I was in my most previous election. I mean, I was endorsed by the business community and organized labor. I was endorsed by the public education reform advocacy group Stand for Children and the teachers union. I would like to think that I had that kind of diversity of support because, my approach to this work is to bring people together. And together we look at the facts, we look at the options, we come up with ideas, we test them out, and we move good things forward with as much agreement as possible, which is you never want it to be 100% agreement, because then you probably
I'm sorry, Sam. So I can withdraw the question. I got a strong sense from you that you were saying you didn't think Commissioner Udaly could work with the private sector.
It wasn't even in my mind.
Okay, then I retract the question, and Commissioner Udaly, you don't have to answer it. Nigel?
Yeah, sorry, I'm muted. Okay, I'd like to ask each of you to give us a specific mistake that you've made that is relevant to public service or to serving on the council. What was the mistake, and what did you learn from it that would make you a better city commissioner? Mingus, let's start with you on this one. Then we'll go to the commissioner, then Sam, then Seth. Please be concise.
Hello, can you hear me? Oh,
Yes, please go ahead. Go ahead.
great. Thanks for the opportunity to answer this question. I think one of the mistakes I've made in my public career, and it very much does, frankly, drive it's one of the things that got me in this race, is I used to be a manager over at the Office of Civic Life, a bureau that is deeply troubled and, frankly, in my opinion, deeply mismanaged. There are labor issues there, there are program development issues there, there are leadership issues there. And at some point I thought, if you were a good manager who was evidence-based and were just trying to do the right thing and trusted in the system, if you thought that you could take evidence up to your boss or to human resources or the city attorneys and somehow the system would get it right, I discovered that's not true. What I learned from that is leadership matters. And that's why I got in this race. The only way to fix City Hall right now is, frankly, to look at leadership issues. And that's why I jumped in this race. I think voters need a choice in position 4. I'm an evidence-based, constructive leader who who's in this for the right reasons. And I think when I get there, we can make a better city, which is constructive and inclusive and vibrant.
Thank you. Commissioner Udaly.
Thank you. That wasn't an answer to the question. And the reality is I inherited a troubled bureau when the mayor assigned what was previously the Office of Neighborhood Involvement. We've made significant strides towards addressing a very critical audit that came out, well, it was done in 2016, but came out the first year I had the bureau, as well as professionalizing the bureau and dramatically increasing services to the public. So I think the thing that kind of bothers me the most is a moment in council very early on where we were in the midst of the comp plan, and a local developer brought a last-minute request for rezoning that would have allowed him to develop a multifamily complex on a church parking lot. And I attempted to champion that change. I thought it was a great project. It was much needed in the specific neighborhood. And I had a colleague that opposed it and managed to mobilize the neighborhood association against it. And because I was a new commissioner, and because I didn't know as much about land use then as I do now, I lost my confidence and couldn't sell it to the rest of my colleagues, and did not succeed in getting that change moved forward for that affordable housing developer. I regret that. There were other challenges involved that I won't go into. There were mistakes that everyone made, but that was a moment that I still reflect on. I stand by virtually every vote that I've ever made, certainly stand by my policies and the work that I've done with my bureaus. But for me, that moment really highlighted the problem that we have with civic engagement in the city. We weren't hearing from renters. We weren't hearing from communities of color who had been pushed out of that neighborhood. It was close in Northeast Portland. We were hearing from homeowners in that immediate neighborhood. And certainly they deserve to have a voice. I've never suggested that neighborhood associations shouldn't exist. I believe they're a completely valid way to organize, and they do a lot of good for our community. I draw a very clear distinction between their function as kind of mutual aid or mutual benefit societies and our desire as a city to do real civic engagement. And if we are serious about civic engagement, then it's incumbent upon the city to create a system that reflects the full diversity of our community, to ensure we are hearing from the broader community and not just the narrow demographics that are typical, not across the board, but typical of our neighborhood association system.
So that's a great answer. I'm just a little bit confused, Commissioner. Was the mistake that you made did you turn around and vote against what you believed, or were you not in a position to be able to marshal enough support to support the position that you believed in?
It was an amendment that just didn't go forward, and it was that I lost my confidence in the project due to the overwhelming opposition. And I say overwhelming, it was probably 10 households out of thousands in that neighborhood. But that's the kind of outsized voice that neighborhood associations currently have on council. And again, they deserve to have a voice, but so does everyone else in our community. So the mistake was I didn't marshal the support and advance that amendment.
Great, thank you. Seth, Woolley, what's a mistake that you've made that will inform your service?
Well, when I was working on the campaign finance reform ballot measures, I tried to do what was the best practice at the time, which was have a fairly minimal charter change and let the county, this is mostly regards to the county proposal, have the county then fill in the gaps. But what happened was they decided not to. We didn't get a viable disclosure ordinance, for example. And so that got overturned in the courts. And also, there was no enforcement mechanism, and we didn't know that the state wasn't going to enforce the law, the local law, like they used to be doing. And so I had to shift, and I spent hundreds of hours trying to work around those problems, including suing people to try and get it enforced. And when we went to do the Portland measure, we had to make the proposal fix all those problems. We had to put the enforcement directly in the charter and the requirements for disclosure directly in the charter. But even that is a problem because now it's less flexible to edit. So now we're trying to get people to comply with the disclosure requirements. They're very long, and maybe they shouldn't have been so long. So there's a lot to learn. I know that it's whatever you try to do, you think you have the right answer, and many times you don't have the right answer. So maybe I could have done more in advance to figure out how they were going to enforce it. And so I need to do more research, I think, in a lot of these cases.
Great, thank you. Sam, a mistake that you've made? Sam, you're muted.
I was saying there's so many. I'll pick a good painful one. When I was BES commissioner and also transportation commissioner and had recently passed the Bike Master Plan, I'd also worked on the Foster floodplain restoration project with Commissioner Dan Saltzman, and it had paths in it. And I thought, well, if you can use BS dollars for paths, you know, it must be okay to use BS dollars for bikeways. And whether legally or not that was true, it was a huge mistake, compounded by the fact that I was being bullheaded and, you know, didn't give up for a couple of weeks. So, you know, it gave the plan an unnecessary association, although my intent was good. And it wasn't, I was wrong. It wasn't the same as paths in a floodplain restoration. Doing swales in northeast to slow traffic explicitly for the benefit of bikes and pedestrians, you know, was a step too far. So I learned that lesson, and I also learned that distinction and that lesson in the distinction, which is a difference. And I also learned that, you know, when you're wrong, and say that and move on. I didn't say it or move on quick enough.
Great, thank you. We'd like to invite each of you now to ask one opponent a question. Please make it a question that can be answered, not a statement. It should be a concise question as well. And we will ask Commissioner Udaly first if she would like to ask any of her opponents, just one of them, a question. Please go ahead.
Sure. I'm going to ask Mingus a question because I'm genuinely curious and a little confused. So Mingus, you've made affordable housing the main plank in your platform, but I don't see a single policy solution on your website that we haven't already done or we aren't in the process of doing. For instance, you say you want to ban price gouging in the rental market. That's something I tackled in my first 30 days on city council with the relocation ordinance, and then the state followed suit. Yet you've publicly stated that you don't support my tenant protections. So my question is, what then is your policy solution to prevent price gouging in Portland's rental market?
Thanks, Commissioner Udaly. I appreciate this question. I think this comes back to our earlier disagreement about building more affordable housing as a strategy for bringing more affordable housing to the city. I think that formulation is fairly straightforward. You know, if we have a lack of affordable housing and we build more, there will be a meeting of needs and demands. And I do think the city also has a role in bringing more affordable housing to the city. And earlier I talked about, you know, reforms at the permits office and reforms at the inspections office. What I'm looking for are low-cost ways to incentivize the market to bring more affordable housing to the city. Right now, you know, earlier there was a question about whether or not Commissioner Udaly can work with the business community. I've talked a lot with the business community. A thing I've heard is that they have deep problems here. And one of the things I've heard over and over again is we have a problem in the permits office. Permits take far too long to get approved, and inspections take
I'm
far
sorry,
too long to get approved.
you are not answering my question.
New leadership and new innovation, and I appreciate the opportunity to clarify that question. Thank you.
Unfortunately, you didn't clarify it at all, and I just want to point out that I haven't had BDS for 18 months. But we did make considerable strides towards improving the permitting office, including, as I've already mentioned, modernizing the software and allowing developers to apply for permits and submit plans online. So if you have concerns about BDS, you should take them up with the mayor.
Okay, well, a thing I want to say, and I think this gets back to the question that the Willamette Week was trying to talk about, the sort of difficulty you have communicating with the building community. No, it's my question that you're supposed to be answering. I think if you talk to the business community, or if you heard the business community, a thing that you would hear is that there are still problems with our permittings and our inspections processes. And when I'm on city council, I will work hard to get those fixed.
Okay, Mingus. Well, I do have permitting through PBOT, and we work very closely with the business community on improving that system for sure. And
Great.
I have great working relationships with Better Business for Portland, with PBA, and with hundreds of small businesses around the city. So,
Great.
thanks.
Okay. Next question. Seth Woolley, would you like to ask any of your opponents a question, please?
Yeah, I'd kind of like to hear from Sam Adams on how much his mind has shifted from Columbia River crossing days, like on whether or not we should be expanding, capacity on freeways. I'd have a statement to go along with that, but I'll just let him answer the question. If he can unmute himself, I guess.
Sam, you got to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Thanks for the question, Seth. I think the Columbia River crossing area, Vera was on that, Mayor Katz was on that for a while, and I helped her staff that, and then I was on that for 8 years. After I retired as transportation commissioner, and since I've retired, I've come to find out that what was moved forward from the project to the state governments of Washington and Oregon did not include agreements that we had come to when I was representing the city, always backed up with council resolutions. And that really has undermined my trust. Some of those people that were on the Columbia River project are in prominent positions in transportation. So I just want to put that out there for those that are working on it now. It was very disappointing. My mind has, maybe that, but my mind has deepened in my work with World Resources Institute, independent think tank out of Washington, D.C. I think that step number one, right away, something the Trump administration, I think, would approve, and my former boss, Congressman Peter DeFazio, not Earl Blumenauer, I think he would support it. I think we can convince, although he's not a big fan of congestion pricing tolls, but I'd like to see congestion pricing tolls on both Columbia River crossings. And you know the numbers. We have 70 to 80,000 commuters a day from Clark County. And if we put congestion pricing on there, we can use trail cards and the SNAP cards from Washington to make sure that low-income people using the crossings would get a break. But we know that in other bridges that are similar to this around the world, that with congestion price tolling, people car share. People trip chain and don't take every trip in a car for everything, but do a number of stops in the same trip. Use those resources in ODOT to free up money that can be used for improvements to transit and carpool programs. And then also see what happens to that 60 to 80,000 commuters and bus improvements coming from Clark County every business morning and back again in the evening before we decide what to do. I'm not going to try to buffalo you. It's a mechanical bridge and probably needs to be replaced. But in terms of how wide, and I work to have it activated as narrow as possible, got a few lanes off at a council that was split on the issue. And I would wait to do all that and not proceed with the Rose Quarter expansion. When I was transportation and looking at it, it was a safety improvement project, and now it's masticized into this awful, monstrous thing. So I would.
So we're in a lot of agreement today, basically, I would say.
Oh, okay, great.
Okay, Sam, would you like to ask one of your opponents a question, please?
Seth, you're one of the force behind local campaign funding reform, which I think is great. I supported the first one, and then obviously we're all participating in this one. How do you think it's going, and what would you say are either some changes or sort of the next concentric circle of reforms that you would suggest?
So I was saying in advance, my main focus was on the campaign finance limits. I thought that was the most important thing. But public funding with campaign finance limits worked great too. I'm also in favor of that because it allows people to not have to dial for dollars. As far as how it's going, I think it's gone better than I expected. The funding has basically been there. I was worried about that. The rules, I tried to work to make good rules. I had an 11-page comment on that, and there's, they still need a lot of work. Like for example, they use voter registration records to verify voters when they won't look at that somebody owns a house and they get their tax bill mailed to the house. That doesn't count. They've disqualified a few of mine and had to send them postcards for that reason because they weren't in the registration list. But these are mostly minor problems. I think it's gone fairly well. There was this little hiccup with minor compliance issues, but for the most part, everyone's being compliant. Now, to your other question of where I would go forward, I want to take a strong look at some of the conflict of interest rules in council, and they're more advisory and like informational rather than actually allowing people to, be held to account to prevent people from voting on things. I think we should consider that at the same time we consider changing the form of government, because if you put restrictions there, you might not even have enough people to develop a quorum if you have too many people recused from processes. So I want to start to get deep into those issues. So thanks for asking the question.
Thanks.
Okay, so who hasn't asked a question is Mingus. Mingus, would you like to ask somebody a question?
Yes, if I may, I'd like to direct this question to Commissioner Chloe Eudaly. Earlier in this debate, Commissioner Eudaly advocated eliminating the mortgage interest tax deduction. I was wondering if the incumbent could expand on that proposal.
Sure. As I mentioned, the mortgage interest tax deduction is the biggest housing subsidy in our country. I believe somewhere in the range of $50 billion. And it mostly benefits upper income households, those that earn over $100,000 a year. And it's also allowed on second mortgages. So there's a number of ways that we could approach this. But it's a widely known issue, and we've tried to address it at the legislature. Representative Kenny Geyer has tried to advance this. I believe Congressman Blumenauer is in support of it. It's part of his locked out affordable housing report, which I contributed to. It's very problematic to me that when we give subsidies to poor people, it's considered a handout. And when we give subsidies to the middle class, it's seen as an entitlement. So I believe we need to take a really careful look at that policy, and it should certainly be eliminated for households that can afford to pay that money. And the money should be redirected towards HUD and Section 8 vouchers for rentals, but also subsidies for home ownership for low-income households.
Commissioner, just so that I'm clear, so you're not just advocating for the removal of the mortgage interest deduction for people who have second homes, but for people's primary homes if they're above a certain income, is that correct?
Second home for sure, and I would have to do a deeper analysis on the numbers before I kind of gave you the income break. But yeah, there are wealthy people getting a mortgage interest tax deduction that do not need it and don't deserve government subsidy. And
would you do it on the value of the home or on their income, or how would you?
Great. Okay. So we're going to ask you all one final question. Mark, you want to follow up on
Mark, are you nervous that I'm going to take your deduction away?
No, I'm not, Chloe. I just wanted to make it, I just think voters should know exactly where you stand on that issue. And you've clarified, so thank you.
Okay, last question for all of you. What is the moment or activity or aspect of sheltering at your home or the stay home policy that you will remember the longest? For some, Ozzy Gonzalez set up a karaoke machine in his dining room, and other people have done interesting, memorable things. Ted Wheeler tried to convince us he's learning to play the ukulele. He didn't make a very convincing effort at that. But Seth, what is the thing that you will long remember about this this COVID-19 enforcement of staying home?
Well, for me, I'm not sure I'm going to remember that much because it's pretty much what I do every day because I work from home. But the main difference for me is I really missed being able to go out, and I do a lot of biking outside a lot, and I haven't really been able to do that much, partly due to the campaign, but also because I'm still trying to keep separation. I got a flu earlier that probably wasn't COVID-19, but I've been trying to not spread, and so that's what I'll probably most remember is sequestering myself within my own house during that, but that's probably it.
Okay, Mingus.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sure. I was literally just waving off my 9-year-old who was sneaking into the kitchen to get snacks. And that also is exactly what I'm going to remember from this moment. It's been both special and scary to be sheltering at home with a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old. I'm deeply grateful for this opportunity to spend time with my kids and to kind of wrap them into my work life and campaign life. I'm also deeply concerned about the fact that they, haven't been to school for nearly a month now, are not likely to go back to school for at least another 4 months. These poor guys have not interacted in real life with any of their friends for, longer than I think they've ever gone without any interaction. I know this experience is going to leave a mark on their lives. And I think about that and worry about that. But my kids are resilient, and Portland is resilient, and we'll get through this moment. And I look forward to the moment when we can all come together as a city and celebrate our enduring.
Okay, Sam, you seem to have some props there. Tell us what you will remember. Okay. Sam, please unmute yourself.
I'll miss the forced Nerf game, baton ball game with Peter, my partner, and the dog running around to fetch the ball. These are suitable for ages 8 and older, so we made the cut, and it's been a lot of fun. We've gotten reasonably good at, and only broke maybe 2 glasses.
Okay, great. Commissioner Udaley?
Well, up until November, I had never lived alone in my entire adult life. I lived in shared housing situations for most of my adult life, and I've obviously lived with my son for 19 years. And a few months ago, Mom moved out. I am an introvert at heart, and my job and my life really doesn't afford me much solitude or time to think and reflect. And I've been thinking about my granny, Irene, who liked to remind me that I had to take time to cultivate my inner life. And I don't think that I've ever had more time to cultivate my inner life than these past few weeks at home. Work is still pretty nonstop. I shuttle back and forth between my home and my son's home, and but in my downtime, I'm just really enjoying the solitude and realizing kind of how overtaxed I was by the level of socializing that was going on. As I'm saying this, I feel like it's probably a terrible answer because I know a lot of people are really struggling and isolated and lonely, and I feel for them. I think because I'm in very frequent contact with staff and my colleagues, that's it's just not as painful for me.
Well, great. Thank you. That was a great answer. Thank all four of you very much for taking this time. It's not an ideal format, but you guys did a great job. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good luck, everybody. Stay well.
You too. Where's your lawn sign, Mingus?